Hey guys, and welcome back. So today we'll be touching the subject of pipe smoking and moisture once again. Since I just recently did a video going into depth about how to avoid moisture, where my conclusion was basically that you have to work around the issue of moisture, because as I said in that video, it's a nature of the beast. You will have moisture, it just comes with the territory. But there's a lot of ways that you can work around it and to try to avoid smoking wet and to avoid having the gurgle in your pipe, which is very, very frustrating. So please, if you haven't seen that video, go back and watch this. Because what I wanted to touch on today is because I talked a lot about the tobacco last time and how that can be way too moist and that you need to dry the tobacco, which is still my number one tip to avoid tongue bite and have a drier smoke. But I had a decent amount of comments that made me think and actually do a little bit of extra research myself, because there's also the occasion where you have bone dry tobacco but you still have a wet pipe. And think about that for a moment. Where does this moisture come from? If the tobacco is bone dry, doesn't really contain much moisture, but the pipe still smokes very wet and you have a lot of issues. So if you ever tried this, I'll give you here some tips and explanations why that might happen and how you can sort of work around it to try to avoid it. And I even put down some notes today. So first of all, airflow. When you smoke your pipe, think of it as when you're building a fire. If you're building a fire and you don't have enough oxygen, the burning process of whatever you're burning is very limited and it doesn't really work that great. It's more or less the same goes for your pipe. When first you light your pipe, you have this cherry going. A cherry is what we're calling the burning part of the tobacco that is traveling further and further down as you smoke your way through the bowl. And you need to have some very good airflow in your pipe. And the first thing that you have to take care of when you're talking about a good airflow and that the tobacco burns at a good rate has to do with how you're packing your pipe. And many people, they pack their pipe way too tight. So there's a lot of videos explaining how you should pack your pipe, and you can go watch those videos and research on YouTube. And I will either have to make my own video again, since I have one video showing how I smoke my pipe, where I'll explain into detail how I'm packing my pipe. But the take-home message is that you're probably packing your pipe too strong, too firmly. And what ends up happening if you have your pipe packed too firmly is that you have restricted airflow. And when you have restricted airflow, you can end up with a very wet smoke. And that is because when the airflow is limited, you could be puffing way faster on your pipe in order to keep it lit. And when you puff faster on the pipe, you can heat up the ball. And when you're heating up the ball, you will increase the amount of moisture in the pipe. And I'll explain later in the video why that happens. But first tip is try to pack your pipe looser. So be careful not to pack it too tight in the bottom. And what I do is that you just air fill the ball in the beginning to where you can let the tobacco find its way into the ball itself. And then I take a pinch and I pack the top of the pipe firmly so where it sticks to the sides so the tobacco doesn't just roll out of the pipe. That's more or less how I do it. But make sure that you don't restrict the airflow and that the pipe has a good airflow and a good draw. And the way that you can test it, some people say it feels a little bit like drawing on a straw when you're drinking with the straw. So you have some resistance. But if it feels like drawing on a milkshake, way too limited. And this comes to me speaking a little bit about air filters again. because my experience and why I sometimes dislike filters is because that for me restricts the airflow. So I have to draw way harder on the pipe, and it kind of overheats, but I don't feel it because the filter is sort of limiting or not make me notice that I'm sort of overheating the pipe, because the filter will take the heat out of the smoke. But then you're generating a ton of moisture, but it gets collected by the filter. But anyways, you need to have a good airflow, and that starts with not packing the pipe too firmly. That is tip number 1. So moving on. Which comes basically from not overdrawing the pipe. So cadence, guys. And this is your own smoking technique. So whenever you're smoking the pipe, if you are drawing on the pipe constantly, really drawing on it hard and aggressively, and you get tons of smoke, you're overheating the ball and you're creating a lot of condensation. And I'll explain in the last part of the video why overheating has to do with condensation. But you need to have a good cadence. Have the pipe smoke slowly and comfortably. And as I'm doing right now, having to speak a lot because I'm recording a video, relighting the pipe isn't really the perfect scenario for having the pipe smoking at a nice and easy rate. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't relight your pipe. You can do that a ton of times. It's not an issue. But you really have to try to lower your cadence, have the pipe smoke as slowly as possible without going out, of course. So cadence can really increase moisture condensation. So the faster you smoke, the faster the tobacco burns, can increase the amount of condensation and moisture. And at the end of the video, I'll explain in detail why that happens. So the last thing, or the second to last thing, is how the pipe is built. So that's sort of the geometry of the pipe. So what I have here is a straight pipe. And I would always recommend, when you're learning how to smoke a pipe, go for a straight pipe. The reason being, if you have a bent pipe, the moisture has a way easier route to be running from the stem and down into the bottom of the ball. So a straight pipe is easier in the beginning, when you might not have the perfect technique. So if you have more condensation because your technique isn't perfect, it's better to have this condensation going through a straight pipe, so it won't run down and ruin the experience totally, and the pipe will start to gurgle all the time. So while you're learning, go for a straight pipe. So why does geometry has to do with condensation? And this gets to be a little bit into detail, a little bit nerdy, but this is the reason why I made this video. So think of the airflow like if you have some turbulence. And turbulence, I mean how the pipe is drilled, for an example. If you have the bottom of the ball in the pipe and the drilling comes out into the ball, if the drilling sits too high on the bottom of the ball and there is some distance from where the drilling comes into the ball down to the bottom, you have a built-in issue. The pipe needs to be drilled directly to the bottom of the ball. Otherwise, when you're drawing the pipe, you will have some turbulence going in to the shank and into the stem. And whenever you have turbulence, where the airflow doesn't travel nice and easy and slowly, it will condensate, because in the air, in the smoke, there's moisture. The issue is, if the moisture is condensated inside of the shank, inside of the stem, and it leaves moisture on the walls. That's the issue. So you want the moisture that is in the smoke to travel slowly without turbulence, because when it has turbulence, it gets rid of the condensation, and the moisture gets left inside the pipe, And when that happens at a decent or a certain rate, it will start to turn into droppings, and it will start to run, and you have a soaking wet pipe. So, if the pipe is drilled incorrectly, or there's some sort of gaps or places where the smoke has to travel over, inside here you have turbulence, and that is an issue. And that brings me to the last part, which should sort of sum up the whole issue here. Because up until now, all of this might not have made perfect sense for you. But a gentleman, or actually a few guys, commented this in my last video, and this is some really good information that you need to pay attention to, together with all the other tips. It has to do with why can your pipe smoke wet if, let's say, your tobacco is bone dry. And that has to do with when you're burning tobacco, and tobacco contains a lot of sugars. And when that is burned, the chemical process, what happens is that when it burns, water is created, even though there's no moisture in the tobacco. So just the carbohydrates and the sugar in the tobacco is being burned, it creates water. And that comes out with the smoke. So the faster you're burning your tobacco, and the more sugar content in this tobacco, and that comes to the aromatics. So when you give aromatics a bad rep because they smoke wet, it can also be because it's too wet, there's moisture in the tobacco. But even though it's dried, it has a lot of sugar, and when that is burned off, it creates water. So what you have to do is you have to control the heat and have the pipe smoking slowly. So that is your technique. So the faster and the hotter you smoke the pipe, the rate of the moisture being created is increased rapidly. And when you have a very, very moist smoke, and then you add some floss and turbulence into the shank, all of this water doesn't go out into your mouth or gets burned off. It gets condensated inside of the shank and in the stem. So there's moisture in the smoke, but you need to have a good pipe and a good technique so that the moisture leaves slow and steady and doesn't just end up condensating inside of the shank. And that's actually the conclusion. So the last thing I want to mention is differences in temperature. And this is very important. So we have here is the ball, the briar, and the briar continues down in the shank. And when you burn, or when you smoke the pipe, the ball gets warm. It gets hot sometimes even. And then the smoke travels down the shank, and the shank is also fairly warm because that is absorbing the heat from the ball also. But when you come down to the stem, this material is then oftentimes colder than the smoke. And that difference in temperature is where it goes south. So when the smoke containing the moisture from the sugar being burned, when the hot smoke enters the cold stem, it condensates and leaves moisture on the stem. And I can tell you from experience, when I'm smoking my Castello pipes, or my Lovat style, or my Canadians, or pipes with a very long wooden shank, and just a little bit of a stem piece, I have noticed throughout years that I don't have any condensation, only a slight bit out in the stem, if it's acrylic or ebonite. And the reason is that the heat gets transferred from the ball into the shank, and when the shank is very long, it gets to be more in the same temperature down here. There isn't such a big difference in temperature, only when you get out to the last bit where you have the stem. So differences in temperature: hot smoke, cold stem, it condensates. So if you're smoking outside in the winter time and the pipe heats up, gets very, very warm, it's nice, And you have a long acrylic or ebonite stem. And these two are disconnected from each other. Heat doesn't transfer from the briar or from the pipe into the stem. Not so much anyways. You have a huge difference in temperature, and then you have a lot of condensation. So my recommendation ends up being, if you want the perfect smoking pipe, you need a pipe with a long briar shank and just a little bit of a stem. So very long churchwarden pipes. I have a Stanway with a very long ebonite stem. It smokes cool because the smoke travels and gets cooled on the way. So I have a nice mouth feel, but I have a lot of condensation in the stem when I'm smoking it. It gets very wet inside that stem. That is because on the way, the smoke is leaving all of the moisture inside of the shank, getting some very nice and dry smoke to my mouth, but the shank gets to be very wet. So that is just a very nice tip. Long wooden shanks, low bed pipes, Canadian styles, or even a pipe like this, which has just as much briar shank and the same size stem, instead of the stem starting all the way back in here. But if you're smoking in an environment where you can control the heat, you can limit it a lot yourself. But just the point is that the pipe can help you if it's designed in a certain way, and your technique can aid you a lot. So the take-home message is, there's moisture in all of the smoke, no matter how dry the tobacco is. Your cadence and the rate that you're smoking your pipe determines how much moisture is leaving the pipe, and the way that you can control it comes to the construction and how well built the pipe is, how much condensation is left inside of the pipe, and then at last the temperature differences from the stem to the pipe and the condensation. So that is just some kind of going a step deeper thoughts into the whole issue about pipe smoking and moisture. And you can always choose the route to not try to mimic or fix all these issues, and just have a filter pipe or a system pipe, and the pipe will collect the moisture and you'll have some dry smoke in your mouth. But if you're the kind of pipe smoker who wants to try to control it with good technique, try some of these tips. It might help you. So comment down below, guys, if these tips were helpful, if they made any sense, and if there's anything you think that I missed or you think differently of. Let's have a good discussion about it. It's all to be helpful. Okay, guys. Thanks for watching. Until the next one.